The gentle creak of a rocking chair on weathered wooden boards. A soft golden light bathes the porch as the sun sets over distant hills. The rhythmic clicking of a lighter as it sparks a pipe to life. Well now, pull up a chair and set yourself down for a spell. Ain't nothing like a sunset like this to get a man remembering. You see those colors streaking across the sky. Reminds me of how life works. All those shades blending together to make something beautiful you couldn't plan if you tried. Folks often ask me why I never left this old farm. Why I stayed rooted to this land when so many others packed up and chased dreams in the big cities. It's a fair question, I suppose. One that deserves a proper answer. It was the summer of '76 when everything changed for me. I was just a young buck then, barely 20 years old with more ambition than sense. My daddy had passed the previous winter. Pneumonia took him quick after that terrible blizzard, and I suddenly found myself the man of the house, responsible for our family's 300 acres, my grieving mama, and my kid sister Ellie, who was just 14. Now, I had plans before all that. Big plans. I've been saving up for nearly 3 years to buy myself a ticket west. California was calling my name like a siren song. Golden shores, endless opportunities, and freedom from the weight of generations of family tradition. I'd worked every odd job in the county, squirreling away dollars and cents in an old coffee can I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in the barn. The morning after we buried my daddy, I sat at our kitchen table, that same table we're eating at nowadays, staring at that coffee can. Inside was $342.17. My whole future wrapped up in crumpled bills and jingling coins. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to start a new life, but it was enough to leave. And Lord knows I wanted to leave. My mama knew it too. Sarah Thompson was many things, but blind wasn't one of them. She saw the wanderlust in my eyes, recognized it from my daddy in his younger days. She never said a word about it, though. Not directly. Just kept putting one foot in front of the other, holding our little family together with quiet determination. That spring was the hardest we'd ever faced. The bank came sniffing around, wondering how a widow and her children were going to manage the mortgage payments. Neighbors brought casseroles and sympathy, but those don't plant crops or mend fences. I worked from sunrise to well past sunset every day until my hands were bloody and my back felt twice my age. I remember one night in late April when a storm rolled in sudden-like. The kind that makes the air feel alive with electricity before it hits. I was out in the north field, trying to finish plowing before the rain came. Pushing that old tractor to its limits, I was when I saw her. Mama walking across the freshly turned earth, her dress whipping in the wind, determination in every step. She climbed up beside me on that tractor, rain starting to fall in fat drops around us, and she just sat there quiet for a minute. Then she put her hand on mine and said, "Bobby, you don't have to stay. Your daddy and I always wanted more for you than just this land." I'll never forget how her voice sounded, steady as bedrock, even though I knew saying those words must have torn her apart inside. That's when I realized what real strength looks like. Not the kind that lets you leave when things get hard, but the kind that lets you set someone else free, even when you need them most. We made it back to the house, just as the storm really let loose. Ellie was waiting on the porch, face white with worry. That night, as the rain drummed on our roof and the three of us huddled around the fireplace, something shifted inside me. I couldn't name it then, but it was taking root all the same. The next morning, I did something that surprised even myself. I walked out to the barn, pried up that loose floorboard, and took out my coffee can. Then I walked straight to town and deposited every cent into our family's bank account. The banker, old Mr. Hargrove, raised his eyebrows so high I thought they might fly clean off his forehead. "That California fund of yours?" he asked. Everyone in town knew my plans. Small towns don't keep many secrets. "Not anymore," I told him. "It's the Thompson Farm Fund now." That decision should have felt like giving up, like watching my dreams wash away in the spring rains. But strangely enough, it felt like the first real choice I'd ever made for myself. Summer came on strong that year. The kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer and the cicadas scream from sunup to sundown. I threw myself into the farm work, determined to make this place succeed or break myself trying. Most nights I'd collapse in a bed without even taking my boots off, only to drag myself up before dawn and do it all over again. It was on one of those scorching July afternoons that I met Clara Mitchell. She'd moved to town to teach at the elementary school starting that fall. I was delivering eggs to the general store when she walked in, wearing a yellow dress and the prettiest smile I'd ever seen. Mrs. Wilson, who ran the store, introduced us with a gleam in her eye that should have warned me. "Bobby Thompson," she said. "This here's our new school teacher, Miss Mitchell. She's staying in the apartment above the library for the summer. Maybe you could show her around our little town sometime." Now, I was covered in dust and sweat, probably smelled like the inside of a barn, and had circles under my eyes you could plant potatoes in. But Clara shook my hand firm, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "I'd like that very much, Mr. Thompson." I stammered something that might have been English and fled that store like my boots were on fire. Drove the truck home in a daze, replaying those few seconds over and over. Ellie took one look at my face when I walked in and burst out laughing. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, "or a pretty girl." I threw a dish towel at her head. "Don't you have homework or something?" "It's summer, dummy," she shot back, ducking the towel with practiced ease. I didn't think I'd have the courage to actually call on Clara, but Mama had other ideas. Sunday after church, she practically shoved me in the poor woman's direction. "Invite her to dinner," she hissed in my ear. "For heaven's sake, Bobby, you're not getting any younger." So that's how Clara Mitchell ended up at our dinner table the following Thursday, wearing another pretty dress and bringing an apple pie that made my mouth water just looking at it. Ellie was on her best behavior, suspiciously so, and Mama told embarrassing stories about me as a boy that had Clara laughing until tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. After dinner, we sat on this very porch, watching fireflies rise from the fields like stars coming up from the earth to meet their cousins in the sky. Clara told me about growing up in Maine, about college, about her dreams of making a difference in children's lives. I told her about the farm, about losing Daddy, about my coffee can fund and the choice I'd made. "Do you regret it?" she asked, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Staying, I remember looking out over our land, silver in the moonlight, and searching my heart for the truth. "No," I said finally. "I thought I would, but I don't." She nodded like she understood. Though how could she? A college-educated woman who'd seen more of the world in her 25 years than I'd see in a lifetime. But there was something in her eyes, a recognition maybe, that made me think she really did get it. Claire started coming around more after that. Sometimes to help Ellie with her summer reading, sometimes to bring Mama recipes to try, sometimes just to sit with me on the porch as evening fell. Those summer nights stretched out like taffy, sweet and golden. For the first time since Daddy died, laughter came easy to our house again. But August brought trouble. The worst drought in 30 years hit our county hard. Crops withered in the fields, livestock grew thin and restless, and the creek that ran through our property slowed to a trickle. I spent hours rigging up irrigation systems, hauling water, and praying for rain that wouldn't come. One particularly brutal afternoon, I was trying to dig a new well on the back 40 when my shovel hit something metal about 6 feet down. Curious, I carefully excavated around it and pulled up an old metal box, rusted at the edges but still intact. The lock had long since corroded away, so it opened with just a firm tug. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Land deeds, letters, photographs. At the very bottom was a journal, the leather cover cracked with age, but the pages still readable. It was my great-grandfather's journal from when he first settled this land in 1889. I brought the box back to the house, and that night, as the heat lingered even in darkness, the three of us, Mama, Ellie, and me, gathered around the kitchen table and read by lamplight. The journal told a story none of us had heard before. Alexander Thompson, my great-grandfather, hadn't come to this land by choice. He'd been running from something or someone back east. The journal was vague on details, but reading between the lines, I gathered he'd been involved in something that went wrong. Terribly wrong. He'd traded everything he had for this remote property and a chance to start over. The first years were brutal. Isolation, harsh winters, crop failures. 3 times he packed his bags to leave. 3 times something held him back. The third time, he wrote, I came to this place seeking escape, but I'm staying for the promise. There's something in this soil that calls to me, something that whispers of roots and belonging. I cannot explain it, even to myself. I only know that each time I resolve to go, the land itself seems to ask me to wait just a little longer. By the time Alexander finished that journal, he had a wife, 2 children, and a thriving farm. The last entry read simply, "What began as my hiding place has become my home. The land I once saw as my prison is now my greatest freedom. I'm grateful for whatever fate or folly led me here." We sat in silence after reading those words, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Ellie spoke up. "It's like we're part of some bigger story," she said. "Like we're just one chapter in the book of this place." The next day, as if the heavens had been moved by Alexander's words too, the rain finally came. Not a violent storm, but a steady, soaking rain that went on for 3 days straight. The parched earth drank it up, and almost overnight, it seemed, the world turned green again. September brought the start of school, and Clara was suddenly busy with her new class of first graders. She still came for Sunday dinners, though, and sometimes we'd drive into the county seat to see a movie or have ice cream at the drugstore. Folks started to talk, as folks in small towns do, but for once I didn't mind being the subject of gossip. That fall was busy with harvest, but for the first time, we weren't doing it alone. Neighbors showed up with equipment and strong backs. The Mitchell brothers from the next farm overbrought their combine when ours broke down. Even old Mr. Peterson, who hadn't left his property in years, came by with his famous apple cider and stayed to help sort potatoes. Clara brought her class out for a field trip in October. 20 wide-eyed 6-year-olds running around the pumpkin patch, asking a million questions, squealing with delight when they found the perfect pumpkin to take home. I watched Clara with those kids, patient and kind. Her face lit up with joy, and I knew I was falling in love with her. That night, after everyone had gone home and the farm was quiet again, I took out my great-grandfather's journal and read it cover to cover one more time. I was looking for something, though I couldn't have said what exactly. Some confirmation, maybe, that I made the right choice. That staying wasn't settling. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell before Thanksgiving, dusting our world in white. Clara's school put on a Christmas pageant, and Ellie helped make the costumes. Mama baked enough cookies to feed an army, insisting we deliver them personally to every family in the area who'd helped us through the hard times. On Christmas Eve, after midnight service at the little white church in town, I asked Clara to marry me. Not with a fancy ring or rehearsed speech. I wasn't that smooth. Just the honest question, asked under a sky full of stars, so bright they looked close enough to touch. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked me a question of her own. "What about California? Don't you still wonder what might have been?" I shook my head, my breath making clouds in the cold air. I used to think happiness was somewhere else, somewhere new, but now I know better. I took her hands in mine. This land, this life, it's in my blood now. I can't explain it any better than my great-grandfather could. I just know this is where I'm meant to be. With you if you'll stay. Clara smiled then, snowflakes catching in her eyelashes. "I've never felt at home anywhere the way I do here," she admitted. "With you." We were married the following June, right out there under the old oak tree. The whole town turned out for it. Clara wore her mother's dress, and Ellie was her maid of honor, prouder than I'd ever seen her. Mama cried through the whole ceremony, but they were happy tears. That first year of marriage wasn't easy. We lived in a farmhouse with Mama and Ellie while saving up to build our own place on the property. Close quarters led to petty arguments sometimes. Clara had to adjust to farm life, and I had to learn that marrying a schoolteacher meant living with a woman who wasn't afraid to correct my grammar at the dinner table. But we figured out day by day. I started experimenting with new crops, taking classes at the Agricultural Extension Office. Clara began a reading program at the school that brought in volunteers from all over the county. Together, we planted an orchard on the east side of the property. Apple trees that wouldn't bear fruit for years, but that was okay. We were thinking long-term now. Ellie graduated high school that spring, the first in our family to do so. She got a scholarship to the state university, and I've never been prouder than when we dropped her off at her dormitory, her eyes wide with excitement and possibility. Before we left, she hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for staying, Bobby, for giving me the chance to go." That's when it really hit me. Staying hadn't just been about the land or tradition or even family obligation. It had been about creating a foundation solid enough that others could launch from it. My staying meant Ellie could go, secure in the knowledge that home would always be here waiting. The years rolled by after that. Clara and I built our own house on the north end of the property, a modest place but filled with love. We had 3 children, James, Sarah, and little Alexander, named after the great-grandfather whose journal now sits on our mantelpiece. There were hard times too, of course. The flood of '94 that washed away half our crops. The year Mama got sick and we thought we might lose her. The terrible accident that took Clara's brother and left her grieving for months. Life doesn't spare you pain just because you've chosen to put down roots. But through it all, this land held us. This community surrounded us. In our darkest moments, I'd sometimes walk out to the fields at night, look up at the vast sky overhead, and feel something like a conversation happening between me and all the Thompsons who had stood in this same spot before me. Like they were saying, "We know, we understand. Keep going." When our oldest, James, turned 16, he started talking about leaving, just like I had at his age. History repeating itself, I suppose. He'd look at the farm with restless eyes, the same way I once had, seeing limitation where I now saw possibility. I remember one evening finding him on this very porch, staring out at the sunset like he was trying to see beyond the horizon. I sat down beside him, not saying anything at first, just sharing the moment. "Dad," he finally said, "did you ever regret staying? Not seeing what else was out there?" I thought about that coffee can, long empty now. Thought about all the places I'd never seen, all the roads I'd never traveled. Then I looked at my son's face, my features mixed with Clara's, the next generation of this land, and knew my answer without a doubt. "There are different kinds of journeys, son," I told him. "Some folks travel the world looking for a place that feels like home. I was lucky enough to already be standing on mine." He nodded, not convinced, but listening. That was enough for now. Sure enough, James did leave when he turned 18. Got a scholarship to an engineering school out east. We helped him pack, drove him to the airport, hugged him goodbye. I slipped a little money into his jacket pocket when he wasn't looking. Not much, but enough for emergencies. Enough to let him know there was still support behind him. Clara cried all the way home from the airport. Not because she was sad he was gone, though she was, but because she was proud of who he'd become. Strong enough to leave. Brave enough to try. For 4 years, we only saw James on holidays and summer breaks. He came home with new ideas, new perspectives, stories of a world I'd never seen. And I drank it all in, living vicariously through his adventures, never once regretting my choice to stay. The funny thing? After graduation, with job offers from big cities all over the country, James chose to come back. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He brought his engineering skills back to the farm, modernizing operations, finding ways to make this old place competitive in a changing world. "Why'd you come back?" I asked him one day as we worked side by side, repairing the irrigation system he'd redesigned. He wiped sweat from his brow, squinted at the horizon the same way I often did. "Because now I know for sure," he said simply. "This isn't just the place I'm from. It's the place I belong." Our daughter Sarah took a different path. She had her mama's gift for teaching, but a wanderlust that wouldn't be denied. After college, she joined the Peace Corps, taught in villages across Africa and Asia. Her letters home were full of wonders I could hardly imagine. But every few years, she'd come back to the farm to recharge, to reconnect. She'd sit on the porch with Clara and me, telling stories that made the world seem both impossibly vast and surprisingly small. The funny thing is, she told us during one visit, "Everywhere I go, I find myself comparing it to here. The way the light falls, the way the air smells. I'm always looking for pieces of home in these far-off places." Our youngest, Alexander, was different from the start. Quieter than his siblings, more thoughtful. From the time he could walk, he'd follow me around the farm, observing everything, asking questions that sometimes had no easy answers. Why do the trees know when to wake up in spring, he'd ask. Or, how do the birds find their way home? I didn't always have answers, but I encouraged his curiosity. Together we'd lie on our backs in the south meadow, watching clouds shape-shift across the sky, talking about everything and nothing. Alexander never seemed torn about staying or going. He just grew into the farm naturally, like a sapling taking root in fertile soil. When he was 17, he asked if he could convert part of the old barn into a workshop for his wood carving. That's where his heart was, in creating beauty from the raw materials of this land. His carvings started small. Wooden animals for his nieces and nephews, intricate boxes for Clara's teaching supplies. But over time, his talent blossomed into something extraordinary. People from all over the county, then the state, then beyond, started commissioning his work. Tables that seemed to grow organically from the floor. Chairs that cradled you like a mother's arms. Sculptures that captured the essence of this place in ways photographs never could. I never understood why you stayed, he told me once, his hands never pausing as they shaped a piece of cherry wood, until I realized I never wanted to leave either. Clara retired from teaching after 40 years in the same classroom. 3 generations of local children learned their letters from her. Former students stop her in the grocery store all the time, grown now, with children of their own, eager to tell her what they've made of themselves. Me, I never did see California. Never saw a lot of places I once dreamed about. But I've seen 47 springs bring this land back to life. I've seen the face of my wife across the breakfast table every morning for 4 decades. I've seen my children grow from helpless infants to capable adults who still come home for Sunday dinners, bringing their own children now. My grandson James Jr. is taking over most of the farm operations these days. He's got ideas I never would have thought of. Solar panels on the barn roof, a website where city folks can order our produce directly. He's finding new ways to love this old place, to keep it viable for another generation. And you know what? Sometimes he talks about leaving, about seeing more of the world than just these acres. When he does, I listen. And then I tell him what my mama told me all those years ago. You don't have to stay. Because that's the thing about roots. If they're healthy and strong, they don't trap you. They nourish you. Give you a foundation to grow from, whether you stay or go. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is the freedom to choose their own path, even if it leads them away from yours. So that's my story. That's why I never left this farm. Not because I couldn't, but because every day I chose not to. Every day, I found another reason to stay, another sunset, another season, another moment that couldn't have happened anywhere else but here. The older I get, the more I realize what a rare blessing that is, to be exactly where you're meant to be, doing exactly what you're meant to do, loving exactly who you're meant to love. To look back without regret and forward without fear. Claire will be calling us in for supper soon. She still makes the best apple pie you've ever tasted, though don't tell her I told you so. After all these years, she still surprises me, still teaches me, still makes this old farmhouse feel like the center of a universe. You know, they say home isn't a place, it's a feeling. But sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both. A place that feels like it was waiting for you all along. A feeling that wraps around you like an old quilt, familiar and comforting. That's what this farm has been for me. Not just land and buildings and crops, but the setting for every important chapter of my life story. The backdrop against which all my memories are painted. The soil from which my family tree grows. So no, I never did leave this farm. And as the years pass, and I move a little slower, as my hands grow more gnarled and my back more stooped, as I watch my grandchildren run through the same fields I once did, I know with absolute certainty that I never will. This land holds my past and my future. It knows my secrets and keeps my promises. It's seen me in my weakest and helped make me strong. How could I ever leave a place that's become so much more than just a place? How could I ever walk away from the truest home my heart has ever known? The old wooden rocker creaks softly as it slows to a stop. The pipe has gone cold. The sun has dipped below the horizon, leaving just a faint glow in the western sky. From inside the farmhouse, warm light spills from windows onto the porch, and a woman's voice calls out that supper is ready. Well, friends, that's my story. Simple perhaps, but true. And if there's one thing I've learned in all my years on this earth, it's that truth and simplicity often walk hand in hand. If you enjoyed this little journey back through my life, I'd sure appreciate you hitting that subscribe button and maybe giving us a thumbs up. There are plenty more stories where this came from. Tales of triumph and heartbreak, laughter and tears, all set against the backdrop of this land that's been in my family for generations. And remember, sometimes the most extraordinary stories come from the most ordinary places. Sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we find right in our own backyards. Until next time, from this old porch to wherever you may be, keep your roots deep and your heart open. The best views aren't always from the highest mountains. Sometimes they're right where you've been standing all along. Y'all come back now, you hear?